international students to switch out of the student route into work routes before their studies have been completed. This is the right and fair thing to do. It ensures that we protect our public services and housing supply against undue pressure, and we deliver on the promises that we've made to the public to reduce net migration. Our education institutions are world-renowned, and for good reason, and the government remains committed to the commitments in the international education strategy, including the goal of 600,000 international students coming to the United Kingdom each year. But universities should be in the education business, not the immigration business. We're taking concerted action to deliver a fair and effective immigration system that benefits our citizens, our businesses, and our economy. We're determined to get this right because it's demonstrably in the national interest.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank you for granting this urgent question. And whilst I thank the Minister for his response, it's disappointing that the Home Secretary is not here herself, or indeed that we have to ask an urgent question rather than a statement being made to the House. International students make an invaluable contribution to our economy. According to the Higher Education Policy Institute, last year they provided nearly £43 billion to the UK economy. In my constituency of Glasgow North West alone, the economic benefit was over £83 million. So first of all, I'd like to ask the Minister, what assessments have been carried out on the economic impact of this change on the university sector and indeed in university towns? International students enrich our society, and they have skills which are proving ever more vital in this post-Brexit climate, which has seen the UK deprived of workers across key sectors. So with current labour shortages in healthcare, STEM, IT, to name but a few, how can the Minister fail to recognise that this policy will simply exacerbate these? The reality is that many students coming to the UK look beyond their studies and want their families to be part of that experience. Without a way for overseas students to bring their families, many will opt to go elsewhere. And any drop in international student numbers will cause further harm to universities that are already facing financial difficulties. This policy makes the Home Secretary's agenda crystal clear. She's launching an attack on migrants regardless of the benefits they bring to the UK. And in pursuing this short-sighted reactionary programme, international students are being caught in the crossfire. In Scotland, international students' contribution to university campuses and to our wider society is celebrated. But Scotland will suffer the consequences of this misjudged policy. Once again, it's indicative of how out of tune this Conservative government is with the Scottish people. So if this government is insistent in pursuing their hostile environment, will they now accept that Scotland's needs and Scotland's wants are different to theirs? Finally, Mr Speaker, will the government now devolve immigration powers to the Scottish Parliament to allow us to choose the way that benefits our communities and our society?
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, no, we won't devolve immigration policy to the Scottish Government. It's right that the UK benefits from one immigration policy, and that's the way it will always continue under this Conservative government. But I'm afraid the Honourable Lady was misguided on a number of fronts. Firstly, of course, it was this government that created the International Education Strategy. That was a strategy that set a target of attracting 600,000 international students to the UK. We've met that target 10 years early, and we're likely to exceed it this year. The action that we're taking today doesn't take away from that goal. It ensures that there are no unintended consequences. And it was never the intention of that policy to enable a very large number of dependents to come to the UK with those students. It is right that universities attract the best and the brightest, and that those who are on longer courses, such as PhDs or MPhils, can bring dependents with them. But it's not right that education is a backdoor for immigration into the country. The statistics that I quoted earlier show the very significant increases in the number of student dependents. In 2019, there were 16,000 visas issued to student dependents. Last year, that number was 136,000, an 8.5 times increase. In 2019, for every 10 Indian students, there was 1 visa issued to a dependent. Last year, that doubled to 1 in 5 for Nigerian students studying in this country. In 2022, there were 65,000 dependent visas issued to only 59,000 students. We don't want to do anything that would harm the international reputation of our universities, but it is right that we pay particular concern to pressure on housing supply, to pressure on public services, to integration and community cohesion, and to making good on our commitment to the British public that we will bring down net migration, which is what the vast majority of the public want to see done.
Sir John Redwood.
When we invite people to our country, it's very important that there is good provision of housing and school places and healthcare, and there are huge stresses on the system. Can the Minister give the House some guidance on how much the capital and revenue set-up cost is for a migrant family coming in? I think the EU, when we were in that some time ago, reckoned it was €250,000 for a migrant coming into an advanced country.
Well, it obviously varies very widely between the country of origin, the skills of those individuals, and the points-based system is set up in such a way to encourage higher skilled individuals to come to the UK for work purposes. But he is right to say that it is a relatively accessible system, and that has meant very large numbers of people entering the UK for a range of different reasons in recent years. And we should be acutely concerned about the pressures that that's having on housing supply, on public services, and on integration, particularly in those parts of the country with very heated housing markets, such as the one that he represents. And that is why it is right that we take action of the kind we are today.
Stephen Kinnett, the Shadow Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. International students are much valued contributors to our world-class higher education system, which is a great asset to our country. But we, and indeed Universities UK, recognise that a tenfold increase in the number of dependents joining students in the UK since 2018 creates significant challenges, and that enforcement measures are long overdue. And therefore, the Leader of the Opposition has already made clear, and indeed our entire front bench, that we do not oppose these changes for master's students. But as usual, the government has failed to deliver an impact on these new rules and has left many of the details very vague. How many people will this affect, both in terms of students and dependents? What will the actual impact be on the numbers? The ONS defines an immigrant as someone who's been here for more than a year or who's coming for more than a year, yet master's students are typically here for less than a year. But what is clear is that dependents of students are only a fraction of the story here. In their 2019 manifesto, the Conservatives acknowledged that the Brexit vote was a bid to take back control of immigration. Yet since then, net migration has skyrocketed from 226,000 to 500,000, which is at a record high, even if you exclude Ukrainians and Hong Kongers. And the number of work visas has increased by 95%, a staggering figure. We're clear why this has happened. It's because for 13 years, the Conservatives have failed to train up Britain's homegrown talent to fill the million vacancies we have, and because there are 6 million people on NHS waiting lists in England alone, most of whom wish to return to the workforce. We want and expect net immigration to reduce, and we have set out plans for how we'll get more of Britain's workers trained up and back to work. And today, the Leader of the Opposition has announced that we will ditch the flawed government policy which allows businesses to undercut British workers by paying migrant workers 20% less in sectors assigned to the shortage occupation list. So will the Minister now commit to scrapping the 20% wage discount on the going rate for shortage occupations? Nothing could be clearer. The Conservatives have lost control of immigration. We, on these benches, are committed to maximising opportunities for Britain's homegrown talent.
Minute.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that the honourable gentleman has had a Damascene conversion to tighter border controls. Unfortunately, I don't think the British public will believe that. It is the same old Labour Party, the party that has always believed in open borders. Their own leader campaigned for the leadership of the Labour Party, saying that he wanted to defend free movement. Only the other day, the chairwoman of the Labour Party was saying that she expected migration to rise under a future Labour government. Same flip-flopping approach, same open-door policy. We want to ensure that we bring net migration down. We consider that to be a solemn promise to the British public, an important manifesto commitment. This is a significant policy, which I'm glad to hear the honourable gentleman support, which will make a tangible difference to this issue. It will reduce very substantially the number of people coming into the country as dependents. But there may be more that needs to be done. We're determined to tackle this issue and ensure that we bring that migration down.
Greg Clark.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. The Minister is doing a difficult job very well, and he's set out the context, and it's notable that the front bench shares that analysis. But most students are temporary visitors, and yet they're counted as, many of them, as permanent immigrants. So has my right honourable friend considered changing the definition to include in the count only those who stay?
Well, I respect my right honourable friend and his deep knowledge of this area. I don't think it's helpful to change the way in which the statistics are reported. I do think that it is, you have to consider the fact that anyone coming into this country will place pressure on our housing supply, on public services, in particular if they're bringing dependents, including young children or elderly relatives, into the UK. And in the present climate, in which there's significant pressure on public services and significant pressure on housing, particularly in certain parts of the country, that is extremely important. We have seen historically that the vast majority of students leave the country and go back to their home country to continue their careers and lives. It's too early to say whether the graduate route will make a material difference to that. It may be that if individuals come to the UK to study, then spend a period of time here on the graduate route, certainly if they bring dependents, that we will start to see a significant increase in the number of people staying here, making a life in the UK and not returning home, in which case policies of this kind will become more important.
SNP spokesperson Alison Thulas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Any week where universities are celebrating all that international students bring with the We Are International campaign, the Home Office is setting about undermining the UK's place in the highly competitive international education market. I am dismayed that the Labour Party are supporting their measures today. Canada and Australia and the US must be rubbing their hands in glee, Mr. Speaker. Yet more chopping and changing, which makes the UK less attractive. Research published by HEPI last week shows that in 2021-22, the benefit to the UK from international students stood at £41.9 billion, with every single constituency on these islands seeing a benefit. And the dependents that come with them, often those husbands or wives, are working. They're not a burden to the state, and they have to pay the immigration health surcharge as well. So can I ask the Minister, what is the evidence for the policy that he's brought forward today? The written statement yesterday speaks of issues with agents and enhanced enforcement and compliance. So what data does he have to suggest? that people are abusing what is already an incredibly expensive system. What equality impact assessment has he carried out? Because Universities UK International have said that restricting dependence will have a disproportionate impact on women and particular countries, incidentally those like Nigeria and India, where the market is growing. And finally, what discussions has he had with the Minister for Higher and Further Education in Scotland ahead of this announcement? And what impact assessment has he carried out on how it will affect institutions in Scotland?
Well, we did think very carefully about this measure and had detailed conversations with colleagues across government, including, of course, with the Department for Education and indeed with universities. In my experience, leaders of universities understand the issue that we're grappling with here. They can see for themselves the very significant increase in the number of dependents who have come to the UK in recent years and why the government would feel the need to take action. The measures that we're putting in place today will ensure that there will still be a route for dependents to come to the UK for research courses, such as PhDs, where people will be here for a sustained period of time, but there won't be for those people here for short courses. And to give the Honourable Lady an example, last year there were 315,000 foreign master's students in the UK. These are very large numbers of individuals, and if those people were to bring dependents at scale, that does put pressure on public services and on housing in the UK. And I'm surprised that the Honourable Lady doesn't appreciate that, particularly given the state of some public services in Scotland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's obviously right that when we see emerging trends in the immigration system that cause concern, that action is taken. I would, though, say if we're discussing things like net migration, we also need to be clear about factors that contribute, like, for example, British citizens returning to the UK and potentially bringing children with them, that also counts towards net migration statistics, but clearly isn't something related to immigration policy. In terms of the wider system, though, the rationale behind this move, I suspect the Minister might have wanted to announce something slightly more comprehensive today, rather than just a focus on student dependence. And would he agree that actually it's also about making sure we'd have the immigration system having the appropriate impact on the labour market and looking more widely at things like, for example, the salary thresholds we have throughout the system, as well as just this change announced today?
Well, I do think the package of measures that we have announced will make a tangible difference to net migration, and taken together with the easing of exceptional factors like those Hong Kong BNO individuals coming to the UK over the next year or two, there is good reason to believe that net migration will fall and that we will be better placed to meet our important manifesto commitment. But he's right to say that it is critical that we do so. If there are further measures, that we consider them, and that we have to think carefully about how migration interacts with the British labour market, because it is quite wrong to perpetuate an economic model that is overly reliant on foreign labour and where people are coming here taking jobs from British workers, and we are not tackling the core issue, which is the number of economically inactive people in our country.
Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our higher education institutions operate in a global market, which is why universities like Lancaster University attract students from over 100 different countries, many of whom come, study and then return. Now, the Minister has raised the issue of pressure on public services, which makes me wonder who he thinks has been in charge for the past 13 years. But my question to the Minister is, what consultations he had with universities like Lancaster about the implications for them on things like the global and league tables for universities?
Well, we have given careful thought to this announcement, I said earlier, and worked closely with the Department for Education, who of course are the bridge to universities. It's important to stress that we have met the government's target of 600,000 international students 10 years early and are likely to exceed that this year. So there's no suggestion that the number of international students is going to diminish rapidly. What we're doing is tackling a particular issue, which is an unintended consequence of earlier liberalisations, which is the very significant increase in the number of dependents following international students. I would also say that it is not healthy for British universities to become overly reliant on international students. Just a few years ago, only 5% of the income of British universities came from international students. Today it's 18% and growing. There's obviously benefits to having income from international students, but we shouldn't be overly reliant upon it.
Sir Desmond Swain.
When these measures have their effect, surely we will then be able to treat foreign students as the booming export that they are, rather than immigration.
Well, foreign students, education of international students is an important export industry. I believe it's the 4th or 5th biggest export industry of the UK, and that's a good thing and something that is supported by the government. That's why we created the international education strategy that has proven to be so successful. But what we're doing today is ensuring that we don't see unintended consequences and unnecessary pressure on public service as a result.
Alistair Carmichael.
So what impact will these changes have on the number of students from overseas coming to study in British universities, and what will be the financial consequences of these changes? Has the Home Office made that assessment?
No.
Well, as I said in answer to an earlier question, we have already met our target of 600,000 students coming to the UK from overseas. That's 10 years early. Last year, in fact, there were 605,000. We expect the numbers to increase this year beyond 600,000. And so there's no suggestion that universities are going to be shortchanged as a result of this. But in the medium term, it will obviously involve fewer dependents coming with those international students. And for the reasons I've already set out, we think that's a good thing. Perhaps he doesn't.
Sir Edward Lee.
This measure is wholly to be welcomed, but the fact is that legal migration is out of control. And the British people didn't vote for Brexit to replace mass migration from Europe with mass migration from the rest of the world. So can I press the Minister on this point made by my honourable friend? We're never going to deal with legal migration until we solve this labour problem, that homegrown employers in Britain are paying too low wages and they're trying to attract people from all over the world. So why don't we raise the threshold to the average earnings? You have to earn average earnings if you want to come here and get a job.
Well, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for his support. He's right that having left the European Union, taken back control of our borders and migration policy, it's absolutely critical that we make good on our promise to bring net migration down, because it does put intolerable pressure on public services, on housing. It does strain community cohesion, particularly when it happens at a scale and speed which is too great for many people in British society. He makes an important point about the workings of the points-based system and the salary thresholds for the shortage occupation list and for general work visas. And that is something that the government keeps under review, because we don't want to see employers reaching for international labour rather than seeking to recruit and train domestic labour, reducing unemployment, reducing people who are on benefits.
Sam Singh Desi.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, the Home Secretary makes contradictory statements to different audiences and thinks that nobody has noticed her sleight of hand. She recommitted yesterday to bringing in 600,000 international students per year. But does the Minister now regret that after having completely lost control of immigration figures, she actually expressed her desire to reduce student visas at last year's Conservative Party conference?
Well, the Home Secretary and I are completely at one in our determination to reduce net migration. That is what this party stood on a manifesto to do, and that's what we intend to achieve. The Home Secretary and I want to find ways in which we can tackle abuse and unintended consequences within the system, and the package of measures we've set out this week will do so in a very important, and as his own party appears now to support it, clearly significant and cross-party area.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I refer the House to my entry in the Register of Interest. As the Minister considers work visas, which have exploded and displaced investment in domestic skills, and displace the kind of investment in modernity and working practices that are fit for the future? Will you also answer this question? Why is it right and fair for those students studying a research degree to be able to bring their people into the country, but not fair for people who are not doing primary research? Surely, if those studying for MAs that don't require research can't bring their family, no one should be able to.
Well, we've said in the announcement this week that we, with the Department for Education, will launch a consultation with the universities sector to design a longer-term alternative to what the system that previously operated, which could be a more nuanced approach. But I think the determination we've made this week is the right one, that those people coming into the UK to study will only be able to bring dependents in if they are doing those high-value, usually longer-term research-based courses such as PhDs, and those coming for short courses will invariably not be able to do so. That will cut out some of the abuse that we've seen in the system today and will focus universities on their primary responsibility, which is teaching and education, rather than, in some cases, being a backdoor to immigration and to work.
Peter Grant.
Mr. Speaker, later this afternoon, my much valued international student Jacqueline will spend the last few hours of her time here before she completes her internship. Jacqueline has been a massive, massive asset to my office, as have the other LSC and other interns I've had the privilege of working with over the last number of years. What should I say to Jacqueline? Should I say thank you, you have been a boon to this place and to these islands? Or should I say to her, you're a problem that has to be controlled?
Well, it would be helpful if the Honourable General didn't spread misinformation to his researcher or indeed to anyone else. It was the government who created, through the International Education Strategy, this commitment that has proven to be so successful, that has led to 600,000 international students coming to the UK, perhaps including the lady he refers to. We also created the graduate route, which has enabled people, potentially including his researcher, to move seamlessly into the workplace here in the UK after their studies, rather than having to immediately apply for a work or family visa, as used to happen in the past. So there's no suggestion that there's any diminution in our support for universities or in international students. But it is right that we get a grip on abuses or unintended consequences. That's what governments have to do when you're trying to control an immigration system. Maybe he doesn't want controlled immigration. We do. That's why we have to take these steps.
Aaron Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. International students studying high-quality courses at high-quality universities like Kiel in my constituency, which I know the Minister knows well, add a huge amount to our local economy. But isn't it absolutely clear from the figures he quoted earlier about the increase in dependent visas that some universities have, wittingly or otherwise, been selling immigration rather than education? And isn't it vital that we get on top of this?
I completely agree with the Honourable Gentleman. Universities such as Kiel, I know that university well, have played a critical role in the economic development of local communities, and we want to encourage that. But it is important that universities primarily focus on education, not creating courses which are then marketed overseas to individuals whose primary interest is in coming to the UK for immigration and work purposes, and for the courses being a backdoor to that.
Ben Bradshaw.
Isn't the truth, Mr. Speaker, that excellent universities like mine in Exeter have sought since Brexit to replace those thousands of EU students they've lost with students from other parts of the world who tend, for cultural and other reasons, to bring more family members, spouses and children with them? So isn't the government having to clear up another Brexit mess of its own making? And will he be honest with the House and explain how he's going to avoid discriminating against countries like Nigeria and India, where students do tend to bring dependents, and make us even more reliant on students from China?
Well, it's a curious argument that he's making, because, of course, it was as a result of leaving the European Union, that we've created an entirely non-discriminatory immigration system that has enabled people to apply to come to the UK, whether for work purposes or indeed as students, from anywhere in the world, rather than making it more difficult for those from outside the EU and having a very large number of EU citizens come here. The proposals we're bringing in place today will tackle this particular unintended consequence of the opening up of international students. I don't see any evidence that it will harm particular nationalities. There are some glaring examples, like the Nigerian one I mentioned previously, but this will apply to everyone. It's an entirely non-discriminatory policy.
Stephen Hammond.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is completely right that we must choose who comes here and we must strike out abuse. Wimbledon has many English language schools, and English language is a key part of the international education strategy. Given the specific and short-term nature of these students, given they bring in no dependents, and given also that they are not a cost on our public services, would he meet me and the leaders of the sector to discuss restoring work visas for these specific group of students?
Well, I'd be pleased to meet with my honourable friend and to discuss that. And as I said earlier, with respect to the announcement we've made today, we will be doing a consultation with the Department for Education that will give universities the opportunity to set out their case and refine the policy if it's necessary. He does highlight one of the other elements of the announcement that we've made this week, which is clamping down on abuse. There are a small number of unscrupulous education agents who may be supporting disingenuous applications which are selling immigration rather than education. And one of the measures we're taking this week is to clamp down on those with much more targeted and effective enforcement activity.
Joanna Chari.
Speaker, my Edinburgh South West constituents do not share the Tory and Labour obsession with net migration. They understand that Scotland benefits from inward migration, and in fact the University UK research shows that my constituency's net economic benefit from international students is £170.8 million, which gives the lie to most of what the Minister has said. Now, continuing as a member of the United Kingdom is damaging Scotland's universities, including Edinburgh, Napier and Heriot-Watt in my constituency. First Brexit, now this. The union has to work for both partners, so why won't the Minister sit down with the Home Secretary and consider devolving immigration policies relating to student visas to the Scottish Parliament?
Well, as I've said many times before, we've no intention of devolving immigration policy. And on the broader questions, there's no material difference between Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom in terms of unemployment or economic inactivity, and so there's no compelling case for a bespoke immigration system for Scotland versus the rest of the United Kingdom. And the sheer scale of the number of international students that have come into the UK, all parts, including to Scotland, in recent years, suggests that the policies of this government have increased the number of international students, not diminished them.
Mr. Speaker, pressures in migration policy ultimately lead back to the efficient processing of everyone who UKVI has to deal with. Can my right honourable friend assure me that this change will help UKVI make more decisions more quickly?
Well, I'm pleased to say that UKVI today is a very well-run organisation under the superb leadership of an official in the Home Office called Mark Owen, and that in every one of the visa categories, it is meeting its service standard or significantly exceeding them. And so, I know the lady always likes to deal in anecdote rather than statistics, but I'm afraid to disappoint her, it is.
Leila Moran.
Speaker, I for one am very proud of the international students in my community, Oxford Brookes and of course Oxford University. They pride themselves on being able to attract the best and brightest, and this policy is going to make that harder. And we value them because they bring value. They bring, on average, value of £400 million to the Oxfordshire economy. So why is this government, and apparently also the Labour Party, intent on stifling our universities, but also our economy?
For the honourable lady, but she is probably the greatest NIMBY in the House of Commons today. She always opposes new homes, new development, new infrastructure in and around Oxford. And so it is quite wrong for her to say that we should have an open-door immigration policy, welcoming more and more people into her community and others, without meeting the demands that come with that in terms of housing and infrastructure.
Tom Hunt.
I am uncomfortable with net migration being at the levels it currently is at, and as do I believe most of my constituents. I understand what the government are doing about one-year taught masters. They seem to be about 95% of dependent. That absolutely makes sense. However, I do have some concerns that some universities might try and game the system and relabel one-year taught masters one-year research masters. I understand why PhDs are treated differently, but one minister assured me that this will not happen. We'll clamp down on that. And we do also comment upon the 2-year period, I believe, that students get after they graduate, where they can stay here even if they don't necessarily have a job.
Well, we do believe that the changes we're setting out today will make a marked impact on net migration. We will obviously monitor them very closely for some of the unintended consequences that he refers to, and the consultation that we will do with universities and the broader sector will help us to refine the policy should it be necessary going forward.
Steve McKay.
The Minister's already acknowledged that the vast majority of students return home. In fact, the compliance rate for international student visas is 97.5%, the highest for any UK visa category. Doesn't that suggest there may be better targets for the government's energies?
Well, there's no one single intervention that will solve this challenge, but this is I think, a significant intervention that will make a material difference to net migration. He's right to say that the overwhelming majority of students, international students, historically have left at the end of their studies or shortly thereafter. It is possible that the system that has evolved since 2019 will see different trends because in 2020 only 7,400 non-EU students stayed on post-study. Those numbers will be dramatically higher in the years ahead. And so it may be that the mix of individuals, the countries that they come from, the fact that they're bringing dependents with them in many cases will lead to far higher number of individuals staying on post-study. But I don't think we'll see those trends clearly enough this year. We may see them in the years to come.
Mr. Speaker, many of my constituents continue to be deeply concerned about the levels of net migration, not just over the last few years, but the last few decades, and they, along with myself, will welcome the measures outlined by the Minister today. Is he able to update the House on any measures his department is taking to tackle bogus college placements from students who sometimes come to this country only to disappear into thin air?
Well, alongside the package of measures today, as I said earlier, we are taking further targeted enforcement activity against unscrupulous education agents who are selling immigration entry to the United Kingdom rather than education. We're also going to work closely with universities and the Department for Education to improve communication to universities and their affiliates of immigration rules so that we can clamp down on the kinds of poor practices that he describes.
Speaker, the Minister avoided this question when my honourable friend asked it, so I'll try again. What discussions were there between the UK Government and Scottish ministers on this matter before the announcement was made?
Well, immigration is a reserved matter. But I would just add that I am seeking a meeting with the relevant Cabinet Secretary in the Scottish Government to discuss illegal migration, but her office has so far not offered a meeting.
The statement is right to celebrate the huge growth in international student numbers. I assume that's the bit that the Education Department and the Treasury insisted should go in. But within that, there is a welcome diversification in that growth, away from over-dependence on China. And that was a deliberate part of the international education strategy. Now, the Minister talks about unintended consequences, but it was entirely predictable that those coming from other countries for master's courses would come from a different demographic than Chinese students, that they would have families, and that, like us, they wouldn't want to be separated from them.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, our competitors welcome students with families, so there is a real risk that a blanket ban on dependence will undermine the government's own international education strategy. Now, the statement commits to consulting with universities in developing the approach. So will he confirm that there'll be no blanket ban on dependence of PGT students until that consultation's taken place?
Well, we will implement the policy that we set out yesterday, but concurrently with that, we will launch the consultation with universities, and if we need to refine the policy in the future as a result of that, we will do so. To his first point, I don't think there's any reason why a Chinese student would be less likely to bring dependents with them to the United Kingdom than a Nigerian or a Vietnamese or a Bangladeshi. I don't follow his logic there at all. We want an entirely non-discriminatory approach, and that is what we have said to our international counterparts this week. That's always been our approach to this. We welcome international students from any part of the world.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The vast majority of these students access their courses in the north of England through Manchester Airport in my constituency. Would the Minister agree to an economic impact assessment on how this will impact jobs in my constituency and route development and the cost of that to the wider northern economy?
I was pleased to be at Manchester Airport only on Friday, meeting with my Border Force officials there and seeing the expansion of the airport that's currently underway. I don't foresee any serious loss of revenue for an airport like Manchester. The number of individuals coming into the UK as international students has risen very significantly in recent years. So to the extent that provides income to airports, they will have benefited from our existing policy, and I expect them to benefit in the future.
Marion Fellows.
And thank you for agreeing to this urgent question, even if it only is to expose that you couldn't put a cigarette paper between Labour and Tory policies on this. Scotland has a track record in welcoming international students and to our internationally recognised universities. Scotland wants and needs the benefits they bring. This government's continuous refusal to devolve immigration powers to the Scottish Government shows the contempt that this government has for Scotland. Why doesn't this government understand and recognise that things are different there, and continual refusal to do what Scotland needs and wants is going to come down heavy on them in the next election?
Well, at the risk of repeating myself, there's no material difference between unemployment or economic inactivity in Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom. So the Honourable Lady is incorrect in that regard, and the UK benefits enormously from having a single immigration policy and offer to international students and universities in all parts of the world.
Stephen Furry. In Northern Ireland, our local universities are very dependent upon international students, particularly so in light of the current budget crisis that we are facing. Also, employers are reflecting they can't access labour without migration, and indeed, which I'm sure is the same for the rest of the UK, our public services actually depend upon migrants for their basic functioning rather than being a burden. So why is the government so insistent in acting against the core interests of our public services, our economy and our local universities?
Could be further from the truth, because of course it's this government that established the international education strategy that's led to 600,000 international students coming to the UK every year, and indeed that number is likely to grow next year. With respect to public services, we created the Health and Social Care Visa, which last year led to 76,000 applications, plus of course their dependents were able to join them, and that was 11% of all of the visas issued to individuals wishing to come to the United Kingdom. So we're doing everything we can to support public services, but we have to address the fact that very high levels of net migration do place intolerable pressure on housing, on public services and on integration.
Adira Wilson.
Mr Speaker, our schools are in the midst of such a chronic teacher recruitment and retention crisis that the Department for Education currently offers £10,000 relocation payments to overseas applicants to come and train as language and physics teachers in the UK on postgraduate taught courses. If they can't bring their family, they won't want to settle here and use the training that we have provided in our schools where they're desperately needed. Why is the government cutting off its nose to spite its own face?
Well, if the Honourable Lady is referring to pressure on school places, that would be a good argument for reducing the number of dependents coming into the United Kingdom, because it's exactly the children of students who in some cases will be making use of primary schools in her constituency.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Minister still hasn't said what economic impact assessment the government has carried out of this policy. Will he publish one?
Well, I've said already that we take a pragmatic approach to this issue. We are balancing our strong desire to bring down net migration with the needs of the economy. That's why we've taken the approach of standing behind the 600,000 target for international students, but making this important tweak to ensure it isn't abused.
Patrick Redding.
Of course, net migration figures also include the number of people who leave this country, and his hard Brexit has made it more difficult for students and others to travel overseas. So that's having an impact on the net migration figures as well. Meanwhile, Glasgow North thrives culturally and socially and economically to the tune of £225.8 million, thanks to our lively and diverse international student community. But what I'd really like to know is, why does the FCDO spend millions of pounds on overseas campaigns that says Britain is great, when the message coming from the Home Office is that Britain is closed?
Well, I do wonder what world the Honourable Gentleman lives on if he thinks that net migration of 500,000 is low. That's too little, that we should be encouraging more. The levels of net migration to this country are very high today. We want to bring those down, and it's for that reason we're taking measures like this.
Tim Farron.
The University of Cumbria and Lancaster University are hugely successful institutions. We're very proud of them. They're really important to our economy. And indeed, they are very successful exporters. What is their export? High quality education delivered in the United Kingdom. So why is the government seeking to stifle our great exporters' ability to export? Why have they become suddenly anti-free market? And will they recognise, will the Minister recognise, that by earning money through international students, British universities are able to cross-subsidise services and places for British students? Won't British students be the people who pay the price?
Well, as I said in answer to an earlier question, the economic benefit of international students is clear, and we welcome that, but we don't want British universities to become totally reliant on income from international students. Just a few years ago, that was accounted for 5% of their income. Last year, it was 18%, and without measures like this, no doubt it would continue to rise. To his broader point, of course we want to support universities like his own to thrive and to prosper and to market themselves internationally. But the business of universities is education, not immigration.
This presentation. Oh, Jim Chan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his answers to the questions? And I do welcome the announcement that it does show considerable effort in committing to the government pledge to crack down on net migration. However, what assessment has the Minister made on the number of children that will ultimately be left behind whilst their parents come to the UK to study for a better life, but cannot bring their little ones with them on their journey to study and to crucially maintain family life, which I feel is really important?
Well, that's one of the considerations why we have said that those coming here for longer-term research courses, such as PhDs, can continue to bring their dependents with them, because absolutely, if one was coming to the UK for a sustained period of time, it would be right for them to relocate in a more substantial way. But if individuals are making a choice to come here, say, for a one-year master's course, then I think it's perfectly appropriate for the UK to say that that's their decision and they shouldn't bring their dependents with them for that course.
We now come to the statement. Minister Spencer.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I draw the House's attention to my declaration of interest. And with permission, Mr Speaker, in addition to the written ministerial statement I tabled today, I'd like to make a statement regarding today's publication of the government's response to the ROC review of tenant farming in England. This is the next step to support farmers in all corners of the country who are at the heart of our rural economy, following the UK Farm to Fork Summit last week in Downing Street. Now, before I start, I'd like to pay tribute to Baroness Rock, who I know is in the gallery observing our proceedings this afternoon. Her tenacity, her hard work, her dedication, alongside the Tenancy Working Group, has resulted in producing this important review. I'd also like to thank the former member